The alarm inside the training dome screamed before I even understood what had gone wrong. Red light spilled across the observation glass. 4 students were trapped inside a collapsing simulation chamber, and one of them was a 14-year-old girl from a planet my own people still call a Deathworld. My hands pressed flat against the glass. My throat went dry. I was certain, in that moment, that I was about to watch a child die in front of me. Her name was Mira Solano. I had smiled the day I first read that name on my roster, because I believed I already knew everything about her before she ever walked through my door. Let me take you back to where this really began, because what happened inside that chamber only makes sense once you understand how wrong I was about her from the very first day. I have taught young learners from more than 400 worlds during my career. I have seen fear in every possible shape. So when the academy told me a human student would be joining my class, I did not feel worry. I felt something closer to pity. Earth is listed in our records under a warning label that most species avoid saying aloud. A world of crushing terrain, unstable weather, and creatures that hunt without mercy. A world where nature itself seems to test its own people every single day. And yet humans still choose to live there, generation after generation, refusing to leave. So when I saw the name Mira Solano, age 14, human, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. I imagined a fragile child who had been given a rare and generous chance to study somewhere safe. I imagined I would need to protect her. I am not proud of that smile now, but I want to be honest about it, because pretending it never happened would make the rest of this story meaningless. She arrived on a transport shuttle 3 days after the term began. She was smaller than most of her classmates, with short dark hair and calm brown eyes that did not match the nervous energy I expected from someone new to a place like this. The other students stared at her the way people stare at something unfamiliar and possibly breakable. A large classmate named Doran, built like a small mountain, actually took a careful step away from her, as if he might accidentally crush her by standing too close. I gave her the seat nearest the door, close to the emergency medical station, just in case. I told her, gently, that if any lesson became too difficult or too frightening, she should tell me right away, because we had special accommodations for students who needed extra care. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I did not yet know how to read. Then she simply said, "Thank you, that is very kind of you." Polite, quiet, exactly what I expected from a fragile visitor given a lucky escape from a dangerous world. I was completely wrong, and it took less than 2 weeks for the truth to begin breaking through. Our first practical lesson involved a low-gravity movement course, designed to test balance and reaction speed under unfamiliar physical conditions. It was not meant to be dangerous. It was meant to be confusing, disorienting, a gentle challenge that usually left new students dizzy and a little embarrassed. Doran panicked halfway through and had to be guided out by an instructor. One of the twin sisters from a bird-like species named Yuki became so nauseated she had to sit down for several minutes afterward. A tall boy named Rowan, from a species built for exactly this kind of chaotic movement, finished with an average, respectable time. Mira finished so quickly that the simulation system flagged her result as an error, because no first-time student, especially not a small human girl, had ever completed the course that fast. I checked the readings twice. There was no mistake. It was simply true. I told myself it had to be luck, beginner's fortune, adrenaline. I reminded myself that Deathworld species sometimes produce rare outliers, individuals whose bodies had adapted so completely to danger that ordinary challenges barely registered as difficult. One unusual result did not prove a pattern. I needed more evidence before I allowed myself to believe something extraordinary was standing quietly in the back row of my classroom. The evidence arrived the following week, and it left no room for doubt. We conducted a group exercise meant to simulate an emergency evacuation. 4 students were placed inside a small chamber. A recorded alarm would sound, lights would dim, and a support structure would appear to weaken, forcing the group to work together to reach the single exit within 90 seconds. It was designed to study how young people respond to sudden pressure, not to place them in real danger. Every part of the simulation was carefully controlled. I watched from behind the observation glass along with a colleague named Ines, a researcher who studies how different species respond to sudden threat. The alarm sounded. The lights dimmed. Doran's large frame accidentally blocked the narrow exit path, and panic began spreading through the group almost instantly. Yuki froze completely, unable to move. Rowan tried to push forward but only made the chaos worse. Mira did not freeze. She did not panic. She stepped calmly toward Doran, placed a steady hand on his arm, and told him clearly that he needed to turn sideways to fit through the gap. She guided Yuki forward with a firm but gentle voice. She physically braced her own body against a section of wall designed to appear unstable, holding it steady long enough for the others to pass safely, all while continuing to give clear instructions without raising her voice even once. All 4 students exited the chamber with 4 full seconds to spare, faster than the benchmark set by fully trained adult cadets. Her heart rate monitor, which every student wears during these exercises, showed almost no increase at all. It stayed close to what the system labels as a normal resting rate. I remember standing completely still in that observation room. I remember Inez turning to look at me and saying quietly, "That is not something a person learns through training. That is simply who she already is." I did not want to accept that explanation, so I requested her full record, hoping to find some simple detail that would make sense of what I had just witnessed. Reading her file required clearance I did not officially hold, so I asked a favor from an administrator who owed me one. When the file finally opened on my screen, I understood, at last, exactly how wrong I had been about this quiet, polite young girl from the very beginning. Mira Solano was not simply a fortunate child rescued from a dangerous world and given a peaceful place to study. She came from a region of Earth that her own government's private records described using careful clinical language, a high-risk zone with limited support systems, located far from major cities, where help could take days to arrive, if it arrived at all. Before Earth had even made formal contact with the wider community of worlds, before careful diplomats and gentle guides had arrived to help her people adjust to a much larger universe, Mira had already lived through a flood that destroyed her entire town. She had spent nearly 2 years afterward caring for her younger brother alone, surviving in terrain that her own planet's scientists openly admitted was unsafe for any unprotected young person. The file also described an encounter with a large, unfamiliar predator, one that had never been formally studied or listed anywhere. Mira had faced it using only a length of sharpened metal she had shaped herself. The report used a phrase that made me pause for a long moment before continuing, describing what the recorded footage showed as remarkable patience under extreme pressure. She had not simply survived, she had thought clearly, moved carefully, and made the right choices when almost anyone else would have frozen completely. And she had not been placed in my classroom by any ordinary process. Her enrollment had been personally requested by one of the highest-ranking human representatives working within the wider diplomatic community, a man whose own file carried a note I had never seen attached to any other student's record. It read simply, "Recommend for careful observation, do not underestimate her. Personal note from someone who lived through a similar region of that same disaster zone." He had not chosen her because she needed protecting. He had chosen her because he recognized exactly what she was capable of. I sat with that thought for a long time before I finally understood what it meant to truly see her. Which brings us back to that alarm, and the collapsing chamber, and the 4 students trapped inside it while my hands pressed flat against cold glass. This was not the simple training exercise from before. A genuine equipment failure had occurred, something the safety systems had not predicted, and for several long seconds the chamber's structure showed a real and serious weakness, not a simulated one. Doran, Yuki, Rowan and Mira were still inside when the alert changed from a routine warning to something far more urgent. I remember shouting for the safety team. I remember Inez beside me, her voice tight with genuine alarm, telling me the support beam above the exit was showing real strain, not a programmed effect. And I remember watching Mira turn calmly toward the others, exactly the way she had during that earlier practice exercise, except this time there was no simulation protecting them if something went wrong. She told Doran to move sideways through the gap, just as before. She guided Yuki forward with the same steady voice. She placed her shoulder against the failing section of wall, holding it with a strength that seemed impossible for someone her size, buying precious seconds for her classmates to escape safely. I could hear her voice through the comm system, calm and clear, telling everyone exactly what to do, one careful instruction at a time, never once raising her tone, never once sounding afraid. The safety team arrived and stabilized the chamber less than a minute later. All 4 students walked out completely unharmed. Mira was the last one through the door, and she walked out as calmly as she had walked in that very first day, 3 weeks earlier, when I had smiled at her the way someone smiles at a small, fragile creature that could never survive on its own. I found her afterward sitting quietly near a wide observation window, watching a distant moon turn slowly against the darkness outside. Her hands were steady, her breathing was even. Anyone glancing at her would have assumed nothing unusual had happened at all. I sat down beside her, still shaken, and admitted that I had read her full file. She turned to look at me properly for the first time since she had arrived, the way a person looks at someone they have finally decided is worth their full attention. She said quietly that I was not the first teacher who had smiled at her like she was made of glass, and that I would probably not be the last one either. She said she had grown used to it long ago. I told her that was not something she should simply have to accept, and that I owed her a genuine apology. I explained that I had looked at a warning label attached to her home world and believed I understood everything important about her, without ever considering what it truly takes to become one of the people who survive that kind of world. She was quiet for a moment, watching the moon continue its slow turn outside the window. Then she said that her planet does try to take people from her, again and again, in ways most other worlds could never imagine. But she said I was wrong about what that constant danger does to the ones it does not take. She said it does not leave them fragile. It leaves them steady, patient, and ready, long before anyone else even realizes what is happening around them. I asked her gently why she never mentioned any of this before, not once, during all our earlier lessons together. She shrugged and said that most people only wanted to see a frightened girl who needed saving, so that is the version of herself she usually let them see, because it made everyone else feel more comfortable. I told her she never needed to do that around me again. She smiled at that, a small, genuine smile, the first one I had truly earned from her since she arrived. In the weeks that followed, I stopped giving her the seat closest to the emergency exit. I moved her instead to sit beside Doran, whose size still made him anxious during difficult lessons, because I had come to understand that her calm presence helped steady him more than any instructor's words ever could. I stopped offering her gentle warnings before difficult exercises, and started instead asking for her honest opinion on how challenging each lesson should be for the rest of the group. She began helping Yuki work through her fear of sudden pressure, using simple breathing techniques she said she had learned as a young child, long before she ever left her home world. She began quietly guiding Rowan toward calmer, more careful decision-making, instead of rushing forward without thinking things through. Within a single term, she had become something none of us expected when she first arrived, not a fragile visitor who needed constant protecting, but a quiet source of steadiness that the entire class had slowly come to rely on, without most of them ever fully realizing it. Near the end of that term, the diplomat who had personally chosen her enrollment visited the academy for a short review of her progress. I met him briefly in a quiet hallway outside my classroom. He was an older man with tired but attentive eyes, someone who had clearly lived through difficult things himself. He asked me plainly what I now thought of the student he had sent to me. I told him honestly that I had smiled the day I first read her name, certain I understood exactly who she was, and exactly how much protecting she would need. He nodded slowly, as though he had expected exactly that answer. I told him that I understood things very differently now. He said quietly that most people who meet someone from a difficult world make that same mistake at first, seeing only the danger of the place they came from, and never the strength it quietly built inside the person standing in front of them. I asked him why he had chosen her personally, out of every young person on her entire world. He said simply that he recognized something in her file that most people would overlook completely, the same quiet steadiness he remembered seeing in himself, many years earlier, after he had lived through something similar. He said he wanted to make certain someone finally saw her clearly, instead of only seeing where she came from. I told him she was already changing the way every student around her thought about calm, and about strength, and about what real courage actually looks like when everything around it seems to be falling apart. He smiled, and said that was exactly why he had chosen her. I have taught young learners from more than 400 worlds throughout my long career, and I will remember, for the rest of my life, the exact day I stopped smiling at a quiet girl from a dangerous world, and instead began paying very close, very careful attention. Because the ones who come from the hardest places rarely ask to be protected. They are usually the ones quietly protecting everyone else, long before anybody else even notices they are doing it.